Okay, well, thank you, Ken, and good evening and welcome, folks. So on behalf of Rotary in Scotland, I'm David Fryer, and we're going to spend the next hour giving a focus to the issues of unpaid carers. This is the second in a series that we're presenting, so welcome back if you were in the first one. Welcome tonight if this is the first one you've attended, and there will be more to follow. We've got an opportunity tonight to hear some different stories, a carer's perspective, those who are in care and care management, care support, and an opportunity to hear how some Rotarians thought and felt and came to the view they could do something to help. So we'll come to that one later. So this is Carers Week. It's across the 4 nations, and tonight we're giving a kind of Scotland perspective. And in today's Press and Journal, if you are in the north or northeast, the article starts by pointing out that there's 1 in 5 are carers. That is a very high number. It shows that there's a great need out there, an unmet need, and those who are unpaid carers step up in so many ways. Tonight we will hear some of the experience, some of the stories. So this is being recorded, and if you haven't done it yet, please would you mute your mobile phones. So we're just getting ready, I think, to make a start to move on to the first of our guest speakers. Please stay with us for about an hour, and we'll look to run on time. The first speaker tonight is Claire Cairns, and perhaps Claire, in your own words, you could introduce yourself and tell us a story. Tell us what's happening.
Hi there, my name's Claire Cairns and I'm Director of the Coalition of Carers in Scotland. The Coalition of Carers in Scotland is a campaigning organisation that works with both unpaid carers and also local carer centres, and we work quite closely with the Scottish Government to improve recognition and rights for carers. So first of all, thank you very much for inviting us here tonight. We're really pleased that the Rotary is focusing on carers, and in quite a bit of detail. I know you've had an event before looking at carers and employment, and you've got others scheduled, so thank you for that. You're going to hear from three of us tonight. You're going to hear from myself. I'm going to give you an overview of carer support in Scotland. And then I'm going to hand over to Raymond Jameson, who is the Carers Manager at Perth Carers Centre. And he's going to talk about the support that they offer carers in Perth and a little bit about the support offered by carers centres throughout Scotland. And then we're going to turn to Shabana Hussein Ahmed. And I have to say a big thank you to Shabana, who has stepped in at the last moment. There was another carer who was supposed to be here tonight, but unfortunately due to caring responsibility, she's not been able to make it. So Shabana cares for 2 family members, both her son and her husband. And she also is our Partnership Development Officer at the Coalition of Carers in Scotland. So she's a very busy woman, and she's going to talk a bit about the importance of carer support from her own perspective, and also about the importance of getting support right for the person that is cared for as well, getting both of those things right together. So I'll be quite brief in terms of the overview, because I think the main part will be from Raymond and Shabana. But in terms of carer support in Scotland, what you've got is a very mixed picture across Scotland in terms of carers getting access to the support they need, both in their caring role and to make sure they can have a life outside of caring. It depends quite a lot on where they live and what services are available. It also, to some degree, depends on the condition of the person they care for and what services there are locally. There's quite a lot of gaps across Scotland in terms of services available. And to a large degree, I think it also depends on how well carers are able to advocate for themselves or have somebody advocate for them in terms of getting a good package of support in place. But just briefly, in Scotland, we have legislation in terms of support for carers. We are, as far as I'm aware, the only European country to have a specific Carers Act, so legislation specifically for unpaid carers. and that brought additional rights and recognition to carers from 2018 when the Act came into law. So where carers meet local eligibility criteria, where it's deemed that their caring role has enough impact on them, either on their health and well-being or in other aspects of their life, like their employment, for example, then, and they meet the local eligibility threshold, then they have a right to support. But in practice, that's quite a difficult process. First of all, they have to have an adult carer support plan or a young carer statement if they're younger. And then they have to go through the process of being able to see whether or not they reach eligibility. And at that point, they may get a package of support, which tends to be relatively small. So to be honest with you, it can be quite a difficult process for carers to do that. In addition, there may also be support that the person they care for received through their own care assessment. And that can help the carer as well in terms of giving them a break and taking away some of the duties and tasks in relation to their caring role. But the reality is that the majority of carers in Scotland won't reach the eligibility criteria for support. But that doesn't mean they don't get any support at all. There are also several universal services for carers that they can access through their local community, and in particular through the local carer centres. So it doesn't mean that carers go without. And Raymond's going to be talking a little bit more about that just now. So I'm going to pass over to Raymond now, and he'll talk very much about that side of things, the support delivered locally through carer centres and the excellent work they do. And just like I said that we're the only European country with a Carers Act, we are one of the very few European countries that has a network of local carer centres. And they very much provide a focus to the support provided to carers. And they also do make connections with other local services, and they also campaign for better support and recognition as well from their local areas. And I have to say, during the pandemic, the network of local care centres has been absolutely excellent. They've given continued support despite lots of other services shutting down. They've expanded the services they offer to carers, and they've also added to them throughout that time and offered new things. I'll not go into any more detail because I know Raymond's going to touch on them. So what I'll do now is I'll just hand over to Raymond.
Thanks, Claire. Just as way of a brief introduction, my name is Raymond Jameson. I am the Carers Centre Manager up in Perth and Kinross. I've been with PCAFS, which is Perth and Kinross Association of Voluntary Service, for just over 13 years now, always within the Carer Centre. So I've seen a number of changes over the last 13 years, as you can imagine, probably none more so than in the last 2 years. But I guess what I would say is in that 13 years I've been here, it's been noticeable that the number of unpaid carers seeking support has shown a steady increase. But the last 2 years in particular, for very obvious reasons, has seen that explode. According to the Scottish Government figures, prior to the first lockdown in 2020, there were 729,000 unpaid carers in Scotland. That figure now, I believe, is near 1.1 million, which is what David had mentioned earlier from the P&G piece, equates to 1 in 5 people in Scotland. Our centre, certainly in Perth and Kinross, has seen increases in terms of referrals by over 40% in the last 2 years. And obviously that results in us offering support to a huge number more carers now than we have probably ever done. Certainly there's been massive increases in terms of the last 2 years. One of the things that really brought carers to our door was the vaccination process. When the first vaccinations were to be delivered, the Scottish Government encouraged people to contact their local carer centre to find out more about it, and that did bring a lot of hidden carers to us. And obviously our role then wasn't just to give them information about the vaccination, our role then was to see what else we could do to help and support them. So the last 2 years have seen a marked increase in terms of the support requirements of carers. I guess one of the biggest issues is that, you know, when the first lockdown happened, a lot of care packages stopped, some through carers' choice, because they had the anxieties about having people come and visit them in their house when this unknown virus was circulating. And the difficulty is, for a lot of them, they've struggled to get those care packages reinstated, and they've had a 2-year period where they've pretty much had to care 24/7. You know, you can imagine the challenges that that's brought in terms of, you know, isolation, exhaustion, and the rest. So that's been really, really difficult. The thorny subject of funding, the funding increasing hasn't anywhere near matched the increased level of demand that we're facing as carer centres from our statutory colleague partners. And the difficulty with that is when you've got a finite amount of money and you've got 40% more carers wanting to access that money, it's really difficult that you don't start diluting what you were offering carers previously. If you can imagine, if you were a carer and 2.5 years ago, you were accessing, say, for example, complementary therapy vouchers, and after the 2.5 years that they've just had, they then ask for more complementary therapy vouchers, and we don't have the budget in place to give them that. It's a really difficult challenge, to be honest. We are finding that we've got more carers now wanting to access more of our universal services just to help them with their own well-being on the back of what they've all had to experience in the last couple of years. So in terms of the thorny subject of funding, I guess obviously the majority of carer centres would probably be funded to some degree through their local health and social care partnership or through education and children's services when it comes to young carers. But when it comes to the centre here, we probably have about a 60%, 40% split. So we, like most other carer centres across Scotland, are very proactive at trying to source other funding, because that then gives us an opportunity to cope with the demand and to try new innovative ways of supporting carers, which sometimes can be difficult when it comes to trying to do things like that when it's the statutory parts that you're using. So I guess if you were to ask what carer centre network does, I guess probably I would summarise it as offering carers access to practical and emotional support would be probably the overarching term that I would use. We've got a number of core functions. You know, different carer centres across Scotland will offer different things, but there are a lot of uniformity around what we offer as well. But just to give some examples, and apologies if you think you're talking to the top of my head, but I've just got some bullet points here just to make sure I didn't miss anything. But we're all information and advice centres for unpaid carers of all ages. That includes obviously signposting onto other appropriate services, condition-specific services that might also be able to offer support to the carer or the cared for. We're a regular source of communication for carers using various platforms, obviously virtual. We also find as well there's still a demand for paper. Our newsletter that we send every 6 months still goes out as a paper copy, because that's the way that the carers tell us that they want to be communicated with. Many of us are commissioned to complete the adult carer support plans and young carer statements that were introduced when the Carers Act was implemented in 2018. We offer peer support groups, showcase events, again, hybrid model of face-to-face and virtual. I think there's been a real demand from carers to try and get back to face-to-face contact, but there's also still anxieties with carers about meeting in big groups still, so we have to offer both opportunities in terms of how we support. Create a calendar of training opportunities, things like wellbeing practical courses such as mindfulness, moving and handling, 6 legal must-dos, these type of things that we feel that might help support carers. We offer respite activities across the whole age spectrum, so the young carers do weekly respite groups, trips planned for the summer. Similarly, stuff that we do for adult carers, our day service team were just away on a residential weekend just a few weeks back there, so try and give respite activities for carers of all ages. Some carer centres, including ours, offer day services for the cared for, which basically allows the cared for a change of scenery, a chance to come away from the house, meet some other people, but also just as importantly gives the carer an opportunity to get a break, knowing that the person that they cared for is in safe hands with qualified, experienced staff at the day centre. Claire mentioned it earlier, but advocacy is very important. Carers are exhausted. The prospect sometimes of challenging something or whatever is just too much for some of them. So advocacy is very important, so we can help support them, have their voice heard. Short breaks. In my 13 years at PCAS, the current theme is how best can we support you is give me an opportunity to get a break from caring. So we get access through some national carers organisations such as Share Care Scotland and through Carers Trust to allow carers to apply to us for small pots of funding that will help support them financially access a break that they want. And the break doesn't necessarily need to be a traditional break away to a spa or whatever. I mean, we've had some weird and wonderful ideas, but ultimately if the carer says that to me would mean a break, then that for us is more than acceptable. We offer counselling sessions, which have been, as you can imagine, pretty popular over the last 6 months or so. We adopt a whole family approach, which is basically if you can make a difference for one person in the family, hopefully the knock-on effect is it can make a difference for the whole family in terms of support that might be needed or made available to them. We help support the carers with emergency and anticipatory care planning. And we also support carers to have their voices heard either locally or nationally. So there's carer strategy groups, we've got carers reps on IGB boards, some of us have got carers voice forums. We encourage them to get involved in local and national consultations as well. So I guess in terms of bullet points, that may give an idea as to what the core functions of the carer centre network is. I guess just to finish, for me, the legacy of COVID is for carers is pretty stark. You know, we've now got 50% more carers registered and probably needing more support now than they've ever done. Finding that we are very stretched in terms of being able to deliver what we feel needs to be delivered to support these carers, because as I've mentioned before, more carers want access to more supports for very justifiable reasons, but we struggle to, you know, sometimes get the funding that's required to deliver what we would like to deliver. But there's no doubts in the last 2 years, emotional and physical health of carers has suffered greatly. We've had some horror stories. When the first lockdown happened, we changed from a carer centre really to a contact centre, and the staff took on contacting carers through various platforms, and it was very soon, very quick. It became very apparent that, you know, this was going to have a huge impact. And also as well, the impact on the staff is something else that needed to be considered, because staff also always had their own anxieties and stresses and worries about themselves and their own family and friends around COVID. But through these contacts, they were taking on those same anxieties and stresses and worries of, you know, literally hundreds of other people in terms of the carers that they were talking to on a daily basis. And I would say probably in some cases, the levels of resilience for carers, carers are a resilient bunch, absolutely no doubts about it. I've never met them, people like them, but there's no doubts in the last 2 years that's eaten away in terms of levels of resilience. But that's no unsurprising, because, you know, for some of them, they've been caring 24/7 over 2 years, haven't for periods of time been able to seek support even from their family or friends, because they've either been shielding, or obviously there's been restrictions in place. They've lost care packages that they were dependent upon before, and they've basically had to take on a caring role, you know, whilst everything else has been going on in terms of their levels of anxiety and stress. So it's been a difficult 2 years. I would reinforce what Claire said earlier. I think the Carer Centre network, one of the major benefits of it is how we can adapt more quickly than probably anywhere in terms of the way that we can look at new and innovative ways of supporting carers. An example is, you know, within the space of 2 days, all the staff here were equipped with what they needed to continue their job role, working from home and ensuring the carers were still getting some practical and emotional support. So I think that's probably me done my bit. I'm not sure now if it goes to Shabana, Claire, or...
Thanks, Raymond. Thanks for that. I think it really shows just the breadth of the work that carers centres do, and they've been such a focus for carers in the last 2 years. And maybe Raymond didn't quite mention, but the speed with which they've had to adapt several times when they've been provided money by the Scottish Government and have had to set up grant funds and get it out the door within a matter of weeks has been absolutely astonishing. They've all worked so hard. So thanks for that, Raymond. I think it gives a good idea of the network of centres. And as I said, there is one in every area. So every Rotary club will have a local carer centre, and there's a link going out. But I'm going to turn now to Shabana, as I said, who has stepped in at the last moment. So thanks again, Shabana, for that. And what we've decided to do is do a bit of an interview style. I'll ask Shabana a few questions and she can answer them, just so she rather than her doing a presentation. So we'll just start off, Shabana, by, can you tell us a bit about your caring role, please, and the support you receive as a family, and what sort of difference that makes to you and your family?
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Claire. Yeah, so just to give a bit of context, so my caring role started probably about 12 years ago. And I think one of the things we hear a lot from other carers, and obviously from my experiences as well, is nothing prepares you for it, you know, and taking on a caring role isn't something that most people plan for either. You know, it's something that happens for some people virtually overnight. You know, all it takes is for a loved one to be struck down by an illness, to, you know, to get a diagnosis, you know, to have you know, a child born with a disability. A lot of things, as I said, you just cannot plan for. For us, it was so my husband's condition started to deteriorate about 12 years ago. He started to experience quite a significant level of muscle atrophy, some severe fatigue, and severe pain as well. He was eventually diagnosed with a neurological condition, a degenerative neurological condition. So his condition is never going to improve. We're not entirely sure what the long-term prognosis is. At the moment, his condition is stabilised, but when he first started to become unwell, we also had a 1-year-old and a 2-year-old at the time. So I was managing 2 very young babies, stroke toddlers, and a husband who was beginning to require quite a lot of daily care and support. So I guess I did what most people do, you know, in times of crisis. I came home. So we were living in Cambridge at the time. So I decanted our family from there back up to Scotland, thinking that I would have some family support around. So we kind of started our life in Scotland, as I said, 12 years ago, with a husband who was in quite a bad condition at that time. I think moving up to Scotland as well, Claire, I hadn't been back up for about a decade. So coming back to Scotland was in itself you know, overwhelming. But then getting my head around you know, how to navigate the social care system. I didn't even know what a social care system was. We'd never had to access it before in our lives. Having to sort of understand what all of that meant, having to navigate the welfare system. You know, we'd never claimed benefits in our lives, and we had no idea what we were entitled to, or if we were even entitled to anything. You know, and with our youngest child's circumstances, obviously, as he began to get older, so even through his preschool years, having to navigate through the additional support needs, you know, maze that is, you know, to get the support right for your child who has any sort of disability. Oh, actually, I probably didn't mention, so our youngest, our 1-year-old, was diagnosed with autism at 18 months. He is he's non-verbal. He has a significant learning disability, and he requires high care support and care during the day as well. So so that is a bit about the caring role. In terms of the support, as I said, it took a while to get my head around what was actually available. And I think you know, it's interesting what Raymond was saying, because for me, when I think back to how I made sense of everything. The carer centre was absolutely crucial in that for us. You know, they were I guess the first organisation that I came across that was able to help me navigate through a lot of that. They were able to help me sort of access a social care assessment for my husband. They were able to put us in touch with the children and disability team. They took over doing all the application forms for the disability benefits, which, as I said, you know, if you've never done anything, they can be really overwhelming. So they took on, and that in itself was a huge relief, you know, because although I mean, I'm very capable of doing them now, that, you know, that my mind's a bit clearer, you know, 10 years on. But at that time, with everything else that was going on, it was good that somebody was able to just step in and say, do you know what, I'll do that for you. You do the caring and I'll do everything else. And that was such a relief, Claire. In terms of where we are now, I mean, we're 12 years on now, and things have to some extent improved. I guess in terms of support, you know, I think I'm much more aware of what's available out there. I'm able to now advocate as well, which I wasn't at that time. You know, I didn't know what I was advocating for because I didn't understand the landscape, but now I have a better understanding of the legislation. I understand the policies, I understand our rights, I understand the rights of my child and the rights that my husband has as a disabled adult. I'm able to now advocate for all of them and for myself as well. But that hasn't been easy. You know, we both my husband and my child get a social care budget as well. And like I said, when I tell people that now, you know, people think, gosh, that, you know, you're really lucky or you're really fortunate. But you know, Claire, you know, because it hasn't been easy. You know, it's been a slog, and I'm not entirely sure whether people want to be bored with the details of that, but you know, it's important to recognise that it's not easy to get a care budget for an adult or even a child, and to be able to use it for what you want to use it for. You know, I mean, just to give you one example, I guess when my husband was first allocated his budget, he was effectively, so his condition had affected him both physically and mentally. So obviously he was bedridden for most of the day. The fact that his life had changed, you know, over those last couple of years, and he found himself no longer able to work as an engineer. He had to give up his job. He was no longer able to be the parent that he thought he was going to be. You know, I think on some level, I think he thought he'd failed as a husband as well. So the package that we had originally was very much around care workers coming in, basically helping him out of bed, helping him with some of his care needs, and effectively putting him back to bed. That was his life, and although that's probably meeting his physical care needs, it was in no way meeting his mental health needs at all. By that time, as I said, I had begun to make sense of the legislation and policy, and I knew that this wasn't right. So I remember speaking to a social worker and saying, you know, we need something different. This isn't working for him. And I said, you know, my husband needs a life. You know, this isn't a life for him at all. So we actually, you know, managed to convince them that, you know, in order for him to have a life, we needed to think about the things that brought joy to him, you know. And one of the things that used to bring joy to my husband prior to him becoming unwell was sports. He used to love playing football. He used to love any kind of sports, really. And by that time, you know, he was beginning to, he was a permanent wheelchair user by then. So we started looking at various wheelchair sports activities for him, and my goodness, it really it sort of brought the spark out in him again, because it was the thing that he'd always loved, you know. So we managed to get him into a range of wheelchair sport activities, and amazingly enough, his social care social worker authorised for him to purchase a sports wheelchair with his budget, and to go out and play these sports. And you know, at the risk of sounding like one of those boasting wives now, he did actually do really well, to the point where he now actually I don't know if I've told you this, Claire, he represents Scotland in wheelchair rugby.
Excellent. Yeah, I didn't know that.
Yeah, so I mean, I hate the fact that this has been recorded, but I have to admit he's not very good. But he's on the team.
So
So
that's good.
yeah, so you know, it's something that we wouldn't have even thought that he'd be doing like a year ago, not a year ago, like 10 years ago. But it's a different way of thinking about it. It's about thinking about how do we ensure that people have a life, you know, and that they're not just, you know, like they said in the Feely review, it's not just about surviving, it's thriving.
I think it's very often a phrase used by the disability movement, isn't it? A life, not a service.
Yeah,
I think you've
absolutely.
illustrated that so brilliantly, Shabana, just in terms of the thing is that, you know, the package he had, it's the same amount of money. He was just using it a lot more creatively and actually using it for something which inspired. And just to go on, just maybe one more question. I know that we talked about this beforehand, and you've got such an amazing example of, you know, being able to get a small grant and using it in such a creative way to make such a big impact. And I know that you were telling me that you got a grant again from the local care centre, just a small amount of money, and what a big difference it made. Do you want to tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, so this was one of the grants. I think Raymond talked about the Time to Live funding. So this is, for those of you who are not familiar, it's a small grant that's offered to carers to take a break from caring, whatever that might look like. And my so I have another child who doesn't have a disability, but who does take on quite a bit of the caring role at home alongside me. So he during and I think, as Raymond again pointed out, during the pandemic was a really difficult time for a lot of carers. I think, you know, not only were we doing what everybody else was doing in terms of, you know, being in lockdown and being limited to what we could do, but we were doing it without any additional support. My at that time he was 12 going on 13. He had missed quite a lot of school. He was at home. He was particularly isolated. He'd just started high school, except he hadn't really started high school because he hadn't really seen any of those new pals. We were getting quite concerned about his mental well-being. He's effectively, I guess, a young carer, and he was being supported by the young carer services at the time, but he wasn't seeing anybody at young carers either because of lockdown. So we applied for a grant for him, one of the Time to Live grants. And we basically asked for one of those kind of top of the range basketball hoops to put in our back garden, because wheelchair basketball was one of the things that my husband could do as well. So we thought it's something that, you know, his dad and he could do as a shared activity outside, but it also was something that he could do on his own as well, to get away from just the chaos in our house sometimes, you know, because as I said, my youngest child has a lot of because of his learning disability, sometimes he can have quite huge meltdowns, and that can be quite difficult for his brother to see. So anyway, so we bought this basketball hoop for him, and he did. He spent, you know, the best part of kind of the sort of second lockdown just outdoors in the garden every day, you know, shooting some hoops. And he became quite good at it, you know, to the point where when the world eventually started opening up a little bit, he got selected to play for his sort of local basketball team, and in his school PE teacher also put him forward for the regional academy as well. And this year he represented Scotland in the under-14 basketball team. And so this is a little boy who'd never really played basketball until the lockdown, with a wee grant from the carer centre. You know, he just spent the lockdown building his basketball skills to the point where he was a national representative for his country. Slightly Forrest Gumpish, I think, you know, but
I think it's
it was
amazing, absolutely amazing. Yeah.
you know, and I don't think the carer centres realise that sometimes the impact that those small amounts of money have, you know. So it's not about, it's just coincidental that I seem to have an overachieving child, an overachieving husband. But that, I mean, the grants don't necessarily, you know, you don't have to represent your country, you know, but I think what they do is they give people an opportunity to have that little bit of life outside of just what's going on in their homes, you know, and it can be a really small amount, and it can make such a difference.
Thank you so much, Shabana. And I think one of the key things is we talked initially about the process of getting support and getting self-directed support and the assessments and how frankly torturous it is for people. Whereas when through the Carer Centre, a small grant can make such a massive amount of difference without all that bureaucracy. So just to make that point, thank you so much for that and for stepping in. That's been really helpful. I hope it's given a flavour of the difference that support can make to carers and to families, but also the role of, you know, carer centres and other organisations in doing that. And I'm just going to summarise, because I know we're coming to the end of our time, with 3 messages. I always like to summarise with 3 messages because I've heard that when you listen to a presentation, you can only retain 3 facts. So here they are for you to take away. One is the last 2 years have been really difficult for carers. I think both Raymond and Shabana have illustrated that. Even more than before, carer support can be difficult to access, and the public's just beginning to understand the role and the value of unpaid caring, and they need to understand that it needs to be invested in as well. Secondly, what a massive difference the right support can make to carers, and it can be a small intervention, as Shabana and Raymond were talking about. It can lift the pressure off from carers and give them a focus, or as Shabana was saying, you know, a life in terms of you know, some of the things they can access. And the third is we have an excellent network of carer centres and really good support services in Scotland, and we need to build on this. And they are looking at reviewing social care. They desperately need to do that to make sure everybody can get the support they need, and it's not whether or not they live in the right area with the right service. But I think it's something everyone can contribute to as well, and so that's why we're really happy to be here tonight and hear about the work of the Rotary as well in helping with that. So thanks very much. I'm going to hand back to David now.
Thank you, Claire. In reverse order, could we just thank Shabana for stepping up at short notice and sharing your story with us? It's amazing. Thank you to Raymond as well for giving us that very full oversight of Perth Carer Centre, and I think we can be assured that that is being replicated across the country, from the smallest island to the biggest city. That's the geography we know in Scotland. And lastly, just back to yourself, Claire, thank you for giving that oversight. And you're right, in just a moment, I'm going to invite Sandy to step up. I'm just going to say Rotary International is a humanitarian organisation, it's a caring organisation, and it's well placed to work cross-sector, but particularly with the third sector on local community needs and issues. So Rotarians everywhere will be thinking, how can we give some form of service? Well, I think this is the point. Pleased to welcome and introduce Sandy Mackenzie, who will take us to the story that is with South Queensferry and what they went on and did. Sandy, welcome.
Thank you very much, David. Fellow Rotarians and carers. It's really a pleasure to be here tonight to show this small presentation of how South Queensferry Rotary assist the Queensferry churches care in the community. I asked our project manager, or the gaffer as we call him, to join us tonight. So you'll see Craig Mackenzie in some images, and Craig can maybe put in some points. So I'm just going to share my screen. And start my presentation. Okay, everybody see that okay? Yep, fine. So, Rotary South Queensferry, caring for carers. Queensferry churches care in the community, or Queensferry Care. Locations, they support older people and their carers Queensferry, Rathlow, Rathlow Station, Kilmeny, Newbridge and Kirkliston. Queensferry Churches Care in the Community was formed in 1993. Obviously, there's a lot of reading there, and the meeting is going to be recorded, so you can read it at your leisure. They have, as I say, supper clubs and befriending services. 6 communities engaged, now 28 years of caring, 100 people supported each week, 290 hours of support each week, and £65,000 of additional funding required per year. Just a small amount of money that's required. So how do we support the Queensferry Care? They have a small garden at the back, and it's called the Haven Gardens. And this was what it was like in March 2020. So that's what it started off like. The work in progress. On the left, you have 3 Rotarians. The one standing up on the left, he's actually a board member of Queensferry Care. And through the years, we have had various Rotarians serving on that board. Accountancy, treasurers, you know, we try to help out. The man in the middle there is Craig Mackenzie. And Craig, he was, as I said, the gaffer. He organised all the work, all the schedules. A lot of Rotarians were involved in it. If they didn't want to come down to the Haven Garden, there was like small chairs taken away and paint was supplied, and they painted them in their garages and brought them back down. On the right hand side there, a bit dodgy, it's me with an electric saw. And behind me you can see a small container. In that container is a trishaw. Now, I honestly can't remember how much it actually cost, but Rotary got a grant, foundation grant one year for £2,000. And then the following year we had a race night and raised another £2,000, and we gave them £4,000 towards buying the trishaw. And later on this year, I think that container is going to be painted, and there will be signage on the side publicising that how much Rotary is involved with it. More work in progress. Craig there fixing the gate. The actual stay on the wall was coming away, so we had to re-secure that. On the right hand side you'll see a plaque there, just above Craig, and that depicts who it all stemmed from and how we actually designed the garden. And originally the garden was done maybe 15, 20 years ago by the Rotary, but we weren't aware that it had run into a dilapidated state. As I said, on the right hand side photo there's one of our other Rotarians, Sarah, who was very reluctant to come onto Zoom meetings, but any event that we organised and she could be out in the fresh air, she came down to see it and help out. And that's how it ended up. A lot of work, a lot of paint. Craig, most of the paint was supplied. Craig, you there?
Yes, we actually were using funding from the airport. The centre had applied and got actually £1,000 from the airport. So it was really airport money and Rotary effort, labour, that achieved this. Certainly their £1,000 went a lot further, not having to involve tradesmen, professionals to be paid. The only other thing I would add is my little bit that I just love about the place. And we had the opportunity to meet with the the staff there and the people who come along. It's the people who come along, they call them members, and I just think that's wonderful in that they're not classed as anything. They come along to their club to give their carers a little bit respite, and so they're club members.
Thank you, Craig. So that was a lot of about 4 or 5 months work that was carried out, and we're now going back on a yearly basis and just tidying it up, maybe touching up paint. There's a bench away just now getting painted again, so yeah, we like to get involved with them and serve them and help them out as much as we can. Another way we help them out, sorry, that's the benefit to users, and obviously this was just taken a couple of weeks back, as you can see with the lady in the wheelchair with the Jubilee hat on. But they're glad that they can use this outdoor area. When you saw it before, nobody would go out there, and that's the way they enjoy it, the way they like to get on. So when the inception of the QCC, it was formed by sadly past Minister Reverend John Carey, and it was spoke to for ministers within the area, Cutliston, Queensferry, Dalmeny, and one of our Rotarians, his wife was the Reverend at Cutliston Parish Church, needed the thought one day of a charity golf day. They do, Queensferry Care do all the invites, sending them out. On the day, we actually set up the marquees, arrange all the scorecards, arrange the course, because there's like closest to the pin, so we've got to be there. It's like maybe 4 hours for golfers, but Rotarians, well, last year I was there for 8 hours, so, but it's really as good, because it raised last year just short of £2,500. As you saw from earlier on, £65,000 of extra funding a year required is a large amount of money, and if we can raise £2,500 to £3,000 some years, it's helpful, and that's the way we like to go. We like to advertise Rotary on the day as well. They have a local motor company, the Eastern Western Motors Group. They sponsor a lot of holes and give them donations, and the bottom picture there with the golf, the electric golf, that was the top raffle prize, not to win the car, but to have it for a weekend, hoping that, oh, I quite like this, I'll maybe buy it. So yes, it's a lot of work, but we thoroughly enjoy working with Queensferry Churches Care in the community, and we always like to try and attend their events. Through the years, before COVID, we used to run a senior citizens concert, and most of the attendees from coming to the concert were actually at the daycare centre as well. So they used to come along with our entertainment. The high school would be predominantly starting in the first act, you know, various youth activities, musical activities, singing, dancing, whatever. And then the second, and during the interval, we would supply them with a buffet, and we had a wee bar going for them as well. So yeah, that used to cost us maybe £1,200, £1,300 a year, but it was worth it. It was a great evening. Basically, that's me finished now. I'll stop sharing my screen. Thank you for listening, and if we can be of any assistance to any community care centre, just give us a shout. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandy. You might just have allowed your email box to burst, making an offer like that. Well done, and thank you for sharing that story with us tonight. And that's just one example of a few Rotarians getting together, and it's replicated across the 4 nations, different Rotarians doing different things, meeting the local different community needs. So it wasn't just about a few people speaking tonight, great stories, great information shared. It's an opportunity for some questions and some perhaps clarifications. And if you haven't yet done it, I'll steal one of Joe's lines, put something in the chat box. If it isn't picked up tonight, there's a chance to follow up. So in the remainder of the time, it's over to yourselves, perhaps to seek any clarification or a particular question. Who wants to go first?
David, I've got a couple of questions that have come through in chat,
Okay, let's go there.
if that's all right. And then I've seen that Bob's put his hand up as well. Maybe a question for Claire and for Raymond, to be honest, is the first question that we had was, are businesses willing to provide financial support funding for carers and carer centres? Are you seeing a rise in businesses willing to support and provide funding? And probably the same link as well for you, same question in another slant, is community organisations are obviously helping carers and carer centres. We've just heard about South Queensferry, but is this an area of expansion that needs to be worked on? And can Rotary help with that? So 2 for the price of 1, Raymond and Claire.
I think they're probably both for Raymond. Sorry to pass them on to you,
No,
Raymond.
that's fine, Raymond, you're it.
With regards to businesses providing financial support, not that we'd be aware of it in our carer centre. I mean, obviously I can't talk for carer centres throughout Scotland. There is a hospitality initiative that one of the national carer organisations run called Share Care Scotland, which tries to match up hospitality providers with carer centres in order for carers then to be matched with breaks that might be made available for them. I think hospitality, for obvious reasons, over the last couple of years has really fallen away. I mean, businesses have been struggling, I guess, to keep themselves afloat without giving considerations to those type of things. So I can only talk, I guess, from my perspective, and there are a few perhaps maybe, but that's maybe us at the carer centre being proactive. So, for example, there's a community fund at Asda supermarket offer funding. So we will apply to them for funding, and usually we're successful, but it's very rarely an approach from a business, I guess, to the carer centre to offer support. It's maybe more about us being more proactive in seeking that support from little pots of funding that we get to hear about.
Sorry, I don't know what that is, that noise.
I guess in terms of the second question, Joe, I think the way of the world is community groups and carer centres and partner organisations all need to look at how we pool resources for efficiency purposes and to make sure that we can best support the people that need it. So I would certainly say in the last 2 years, more than ever, we've started now delivering things in partnership with, you know, condition-specific organisations and with other organisations, because you know, they've got that's their area of expertise. They may have separate funding to help support that, but it's it helps. Pooling resources means that you can probably support more people, and the financial commitment doesn't then just fall on one individual organisation.
Yes. This could be an example where Rotary maybe could play a part and could step up. Sandy's given a good example of what they managed to do.
I think, David, just to say, you may think from, I mean, I don't know, but from a Rotary perspective, you may think, you know, I don't know, just pluck a figure out there, £5,000 isn't a lot of money. £5,000 could make the world of difference to, you know, a number of carers in terms of us being able to provide, for example, as Shabana was mentioning, that access to a small pot of money to go and do something for themselves for the first time, thinking that they matter, because it's something that they can do for themselves, because, you know, often I feel that they feel that they're forgotten and are a secondary consideration, sometimes behind a cared for person. So, you know, never think that an amount of money is in a small amount of money and would that not be any use, because trust us, from a carer centre perspective, we would always find a use for any money.
Brilliant.
Thank you, Raymond. Here's the opportunity, Bob. You're welcome to come in, and you need to unmute yourself.
Bob, we're not hearing you. there a problem with your microphone? Yeah, sorry, Bob, you're still not hearing you, and there's background noise. Your microphone doesn't look as though it's working. Could you put it in chat?
Can we do the?
Could I ask it? I noticed that Bob's from the Rotary Club of Perth Canule, which is fabulous. So, Bob, if you want to phone me and have a chat about anything, then please feel free to do so.
Oh, that's
Right.
thanks.
Here, thank you, Raymond. That's a great offer. If we can get back to Bob, we will. Let's see. Is there anybody else who would like to come in? A possible question, some clarification or a comment?
Forgive me if nobody's got a question. We cared for my mum and we got self-directed support. Has that helped? Is that part of what the grant that Shabana was talking about?
So can I just come in there, Joe? So self-directed support is something quite different. So self-directed support is the budget that I was talking about that my husband gets to support him with his with his outcomes in terms of leading a good life. So self-directed support is something that you need to be assessed for by the local authority, and I think it's probably important to distinguish between the funds that carer centres are able to offer and self-directed support. So to be able to access self-directed support, often people who have support needs and carers need to go through quite an extensive assessment process. It can be quite a long process. I don't know whether perhaps you had that experience or maybe you didn't, but it can be quite a lengthy process just to get assessed, and then to get the budget in place and then to get the support in place. Sometimes carers don't have that amount of time, and usually that length of time can often send a carer into a crisis, which is why some of the smaller grants that Raymond talked about are absolutely crucial to almost stop a carer going into crisis. But self-directed support is a much longer term sustainable way of supporting a person with support needs, and carers of course as well. And it's statutory funding as opposed to coming from your carer centre. I don't know if that's helped to clarify that, Joe.
It did. Thank you very much. Thank you. That's great. David, I'm conscious that time is now on my Mickey Mouse watch, says we've got about a minute. Ken, is that right?
Let's just check if there's anybody else who'd like to come in very quickly. I'm not seeing the electronic hand pop up.
I did. Just to say, we at Rotary Club of Livingston, I've spoke privately to Joe, but we're very much a community focused Rotary Club, and we operated all through COVID, and we were being we had people and groups being referred to us by our local authority, West Lothian Council, and we did a vast amount of work with both unpaid and paid carers. We get approached, like Shabana is saying, buying a basketball hoop. We get approached by people like Shabana if we will provide that. And we do projects like that. So can I say to all of the carers, whether paid or unpaid or the groups, try and go to your Rotary clubs and explain what you're needing, even if it's a small thing. I think people have not really been thinking in that way. But Shabana, thank you. You encapsulated everything that we found in the last 2.5 years. And I'm glad we did what we were doing. Thanks you.
Suzette. And we're going to book you for the next one.
Yeah. We've been doing a lot of good work, but it's very community focused.
Could I just add to that, whilst Rotary is very good and will roll its sleeves up to raise money, it can also help access grants that are available out there. And that's another benefit of cross-sector working as well, to draw money that's out there into communities to meet the kind of unmet needs we've had insight into tonight. Coming to a close, but I'm going to go back to Claire because your hand is up.
Thank you. No, it was just really good to hear that, care centres might be able to approach the Rotary as well. And I was wondering if there is a contact list we can circulate with the care centre network, just in case they're not aware of who their local Rotary is.
I think we'll look into that if that's all right, Claire, and come back to you. You've obviously sent us the list of carers centres that will go out to everybody on the call, and we're looking at putting something on the 3 Rotary in Scotland district websites. So can we come back to you on that one?
Yeah, that's great, thanks.
You're muted, David. And now you're fined.
I know I'm fine, but it's always finding the right button. I've done it. Thank you everybody for joining in tonight. Some folk have travelled great distances to be here, and we hope you've all enjoyed being here, listening, and got insight into the issues facing carers. And on the average of 1 in 5, we could work out what that means just from our gathering tonight. Much has been done, but there's still so much more to be done. But to borrow a well-known phrase, every little helps, and things can be done. So quickly to say thank you to Claire for the work you put in, the oversight. Thank you to Raymond, and thank you also once again to Shabana, stepping up and sharing that story. So this work will go on, and next time we're going to be giving a focus around young carers, but that won't be until after the school holidays. So it's for me to say at just on 8 o'clock, thank you for attending. You're registered. You will get some follow-up from this. You will get a link to this recording. Please share it. Please take it to wherever you feel you've got an audience to get the message out there. So there's a great need, and we can all work together to do something that will help. So I'd like to thank everybody again. Joe, any other comments? If not,
yeah, thanks. Just thanks to Ken for hosting. Thank you, Ken. You put some time in on this. Much appreciated. Thank you. And thanks everybody for coming. Safe back to your living rooms. And Raymond, hope you get your chips on the way home.
You deserve it. Take care, folks.
Thanks.
Stay well.
Bye.
Stay safe. Bye for now.